Why is it important to do this, to institute tariffs, to rethink trade?
I think you have to start with the proposition, has the system failed? And to me, it's an emphatic yes. I think of it in sort of two ways. One, if you think of the way trade is supposed to work, you're supposed to export in order to import that, and then you get the benefit of trade. You get actually, you do what you do best, I do what I do best, or I do what you do less best.
Right.
You export, we import, and we get the benefit. We both have higher standards of living. That's not really it's evolved to. It's evolved to now where you have a few countries, the United States being the biggest, that have an open capital system and an open trading system, and other countries have an industrial policy that is designed not to increase the standard of living of their citizens, but to gain wealth. So what they're trying to do is get wealth in order to get assets in the United States, in order to get technology, in order to get all these kind of things that make you wealthy. So I think of the kind of failure points as being, one, because this system doesn't work, we have this giant transfer of wealth from the United States overseas, and that is in the form of trade deficits. And the way the system is supposed to work, no one should have large trade deficits for long periods of time. Things can happen. You can do it. You could have trade deficits with one country, surplus with another. But the notion of a country having hundreds of billions of dollars of trade deficits every year is not how it's supposed to work. We now are to the point where our trade deficits, they calculate them at about $700 or $800 billion. If you did it the way you or I would do in a sensible way, you'd probably be at $1 trillion or $1.25 trillion. So that's a transfer of wealth from Americans overseas in return for current consumption. And it has nothing to do with economics. It's entirely the result of industrial policy of other people and our being defenseless. Donald Trump's essence is he says we're getting ripped off. Our workers are getting screwed. It's not because they're lazy or stupid. It's because we have a bad system that is hurting them, and it's destabilizing the country. And all of these are data points that kind of make that point. And once you realize that, you realize you have to do something, right? The purpose of the economy, first of all, obviously, is national security. But after that, it's to distribute resources and wealth so that most Americans live the best lives they can live. And we have lost that. We have just plain lost it. What we really need, I've evolved to, is balanced trade. We need a system that enforces kind of trade balance, not with countries, but globally. Countries shouldn't be able to be huge surplus countries year after year, like China, of course, being the worst example, but also Germany. Ireland is evolving to that. And there's a bunch of other countries we could talk about. Countries shouldn't be able to do that. And so you say, well, how do you achieve that? You really need to put in place, I would say, some kind of tariffs to offset this fundamental unfairness. You're not just offsetting their tariffs. Europe's 10% on autos. We're 2.5%. If Europe went to zero, we still wouldn't sell very many cars in Europe. We just wouldn't. Our companies basically make small trucks. They don't need them there. I mean, it's just there's a lot of reasons why that wouldn't happen. But what you need, you can't have countries have huge trade surpluses over long periods of time. You have to enforce, and you have to penalize countries that have surpluses all the time, and let countries that have deficits all the time get back to balance. If you do that, you then get the benefits of trade.
If you take a system that's been in place for generations, which the current one has been, even if it doesn't work well, even if it hurts your country, changing it is still, or changing anything that's been in place a long time is still a major lift, and it has, turmoil that accompanies it. So can you just be more specific about what sort of turmoil you anticipate as this administration puts into place this new system?
First of all, I have complete confidence that the president will do what he said he's going to do, right? And unlike a lot of politicians, he ran on like real substance and big ideas, and this is probably the biggest of the ideas that he ran on. And I think he's going to follow through on his promises, because that's the most important thing. The worst case would be that he doesn't. So what you have to do is put in place tariffs, as I say, to offset not just tariffs. That's a tiny thing. I just keep going back to this point because it's so fundamental. The problem is not just foreign tariffs. That's a tiny part of the problem. But to offset this unfairness. So he has to put those tariffs in place. When you do that, I do not believe you'll have inflation, and we should talk about that in a systemic, fundamental way. But you will have people who have supply chains that are going to have to make adjustments. You've got some things that may go up in price for some period of time. All these kinds of things will have an impact on people in daily life. But I think it'll be short-termed. I call them disruptions. I think it'll be short-termed. I don't think it'll lead to systemic inflation. And I think that people say, well, what should a businessman do? And I say the smarter businessmen and businesswomen are going to figure it out, right? And they get paid a lot of money to do that. And they're going to say, here are the rules. Just on that point, I've had business people, really smart business people, when I would explain this problem, and they would say, Bob, it's the government's responsibility to set up the rules. I'll figure out a way to make money in the rules. That's my responsibility. But I shouldn't be doing this social stuff. That's not my job. My job is to make whatever widgets and to make them profitable and employ my people. And I think that's kind of an important point. It's President Trump's responsibility now. He's the president to set in place a system where these good results for our people will come out. And I think he will.
Of all the potential effects of changing our system to the one that you describe, it seems to me that inflation is, certainly as a political matter and an immediate matter, the scariest. First of all, it's really easy to measure. Second, it's obvious. I don't know if it's easy to measure. It's very obvious to people when the things they buy regularly become more expensive. So, I mean, I just want to linger on this for a second. To what extent are we going to see increased inflation because of this?
So Tucker, I think there's going to be disruption, and disruption is going to have some prices go up, but some won't. So let's think about inflation just the way we should think about it. One, inflation is a systemic thing. It's not like your shirt costs more. If your pants cost less, that's not inflation. That's just a more expensive shirt. So the question is whether it's going to systemically raise prices. A lot of people would say, including Milton Friedman, that's really a monetary phenomenon. It's basically monetary policy that's going to dictate whether everything goes up or everything goes down. And this is not going to change monetary policy necessarily. Now, someone might say, it's going to slow down the economy, thus we should lower interest rates. Someone else will say it's going to have inflation, thus we should raise interest rates. So it's kind of a conundrum for the Fed. But set that aside. The notion is that you will increase production in the United States. You will maintain consumption at about the same, and that will not be inflationary. If anything, it'll be deflationary. So that's our idea. There's a model that some economists use called the GTAP model, which, by the way, generally assumes you cannot get economic growth, that you're a full capacity, industrial capacity, and full employment. So if you have a model like that, then that's going to show inflation. But I would suggest that the model is not predictive. And indeed, the St. Louis Fed made the statement a few years ago that the predictive quality of this model is 0.0%. So a lot of the economists are using a model that's unhelpful. But so the notion is you're going to increase production, and that will happen, and that is not going to be inflationary. The idea is that inflation is systemic, not individual prices, so you can't just stack stuff up. The other thing is, in the argument against inflation, is that we did it last time in a big way. All the same people said it would be inflationary, and we had no inflation, right? We had 1.3%, so we had no inflation. So they were proven wrong. And then the final thing I would say, if the notion that economists use, which is that trade barriers create inflation, and that's the basic notion that you're talking about on their side, why is it that China has deflation and not inflation? Why is it that the country with the most trade barriers actually has no inflation at all? And if you look like at Germany, they have some inflation, but it's less than a lot of the rest of Europe. So it would suggest that there is not necessarily a relationship between tariffs and inflation.
It would suggest it. I mean,
and I would add one other thing. If you look at the president's program generally, all right, the program is going to be tax cuts, spending cuts, deregulation, more energy, and tariffs. Now, even all but a hardcore partisan would say the combination of that can't be inflationary, right? The combination of cutting spending, getting rid of regulation, increasing energy, those things can't be inflationary. Now,
they're anti-inflationary.
They're all
we have inflation because we've done the opposite. We made energy more expensive.
That's precisely right.
Spend too much.
That's precisely right.
It seems like it's really a conversation about China.
So there are kind of two things. One, we have a trade problem, and that problem is trade deficits, and it's having all the bad effects that I said on our people and on the wealth of our country generally. That is a problem that has to be resolved. Connected but independent of that is the question of the geopolitical competition with China. So I always start with you're either on one side or the other. And I put people in like three categories, Tucker. There are people that study the issue, and I'm going to go through the kind of litany in a minute. But to set it up, there are people that study this issue and say China is an existential threat to America. They are an adversary, and we have to make change. And I'm in that group. There's another group that studies it and says China is an existential threat. They're an adversary, but we don't need to do anything because it'll all kind of be resolved through this or that. That's a group that was very popular in the 90s. It doesn't really exist anymore. I call it the unicorn group, right? People who have kind of been proven wrong, that it's just you have to do something. The third group are people that study it and conclude that there isn't a problem. China's not an adversary and there's no existential threat. That group is all invested in China, right? So you can kind of divide the world when you're talking to someone, which of these three groups are you in? If you're in the last group, then you're basically a compromised person because no rational person can look at the data, look at the facts and conclude that China is not a threat and an adversary. So let's look at.
Wait, can I suggest a fourth group?
What's that?
Might be people who look at the current situation and say, yes, China's an adversary. Yes, China's economy is larger than ours. Yes, the future belongs to China. We're not equipped for a confrontation with China, either economically or militarily. And so we have to kind of figure out how to deal with the inevitable.
So yeah, this is kind of the defeatist caucus, right? The one that is all over for the world. I generally find that group has a very large overlap with group 3 that I articulated.
Right. The people invested in China.
The people invested in China that are already going to make money. But for sure, there are people, but I always say to them, you can't say do nothing in the face of a crisis. If you say do nothing in the face of a crisis, then I have not convinced you that we have a crisis. Because it's irrational if you accept the fact that it's a crisis to say do nothing. That's not a rational.
Well, it's kind of lie back and think of England kind of thing, like it's going to happen. So
while England slept, yeah. Let's think of why I have this conclusion, and none of this is going to be news, I don't think, to anyone who's listening. But one, China has the biggest army in the world, and they're growing it. They have the biggest navy in the world. They are militarizing the South China Sea in a way we haven't seen since the Second World War. They're asserting territorial claims all around them. I mean, it's not just Vietnam and Philippines, but it's also Japan, and you could just go all around them. They are engaging in espionage on a scale we haven't seen. The FBI says they start a new Chinese espionage case every few hours, and they have thousands of them. They have suborned perjury from 2 sailors about last year and a month ago, 2 Army officers, not perjury, but espionage. to sell secrets to them. They are building nuclear silos all over the place. They have their diplomatic wolf warriors go around and do whatever they think is going to be disruptive of the United States. They're building military bases around the world. They have things like this thing that's on the news now, and this shipping company at either end of the shipping facility at either end of the Panama Canal. So I mean, they're gathering data. They're engaging in economic warfare with the United States in terms of stealing technology and technology transfer and all the kinds of other things of which we are aware. They are funding the war in the Middle East. They're funding the war in Europe. Just without question, it's their money. They're selling all the fentanyl, at least the precursors of all the fentanyl that comes into the United States. And it's not like the people that are selling the precursors for the fentanyl are an odd group. They're big companies in China that are doing it, I would suggest, with the approval of the Communist Party, because they don't have the problem at home. So if you sort of set aside the diplomatic, the military, the economic, you put all these things back to back, and then you look at their own words where they talk about change not seen in 100 years and prepare for war and all these kinds of things, it's pretty clear that their view is they should be number one in the world. Their view is the world is better off with totalitarianism, politically Marxism, and economically communism. Right? This is their scheme, and that we're in their way. This is their objective. There's this centrality of China runs through their history for 2,000 years. And we are a problem. So for all of those reasons, you have to realize we have a real existential threat, and we have to do something about it. And the first thing you do is you stop transferring hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth to people that they're using to build technology and military systems to defeat you, right? That's the first thing you do. And we are doing that. We're transferring hundreds of billions of dollars in trade deficit. We are transferring hundreds of billions of dollars in stolen technology. We are transferring money through this fentanyl crisis that we have. If you look at all of these things, you have to stop that, right? It is like the first thing you do is you stop digging when you're in a hole. So what we need, I would propose, is not no economic relationship. I'm not for decoupling, but I think we need strategic decoupling. I think we need balanced trade in areas that benefit America. I think we need independent technology going forward, made with America and with Americans' allies. And then I think we have to regulate ingoing and outgoing investments so that it's in the interest of the country. So I think we need a heads-up kind of a policy. We can't keep going on the direction we're going.
I agree. They also bribed the last president, if I could just say, very obviously, which is kind of a big deal. It's been